What happens when banks ditch coal? Hey everyone, buckle up, because in this video we're going on a deep dive into what really happens when major banks decide to restrict financing for the coal industry. This has become a hot-button issue as banks face rising pressure from activists and shareholders to cut ties with coal over climate change concerns. But do these policies that ditch coal actually matter? What are the tangible impacts not just on coal companies, but on the wider energy landscape and climate? There are some really surprising ripple effects, so let's analyze this complex issue from all angles. Banks restricting coal funding. First, let's set the context around major banks deciding to limit support for the coal sector. In recent years, incumbent banks like Citi, Goldman Sachs, and JP Morgan have announced policies that prohibit or heavily constrain financing for new coal mines, power plants, and infrastructure. These decisions come amidst campaigns from environmental groups highlighting coal's massive contributions to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Activist pressure has ramped up. Banks also face rising scrutiny from institutional shareholders worried about the long-term financial risks of investing in coal. So between activism and shareholder oversight, many banks determine that curtailing coal funding allows them to portray themselves as climate leaders. This builds their brand. However, reduced financing options objectively make it much harder for new coal projects to get approved and developed. So these policies send a symbolic message, but also have real teeth. Coal is clearly being phased out. Impacts on new coal projects. What then is the tangible real-world impact when banks ditch coal? Well, research shows it significantly hinders the development of new coal power. A 2020 study by the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis found that after major banks started withdrawing support, the number of new coal plants proposed across the world dropped 11% in just 1 year. So we can conclusively say banks backing away from coal meaningfully slows down the pipeline and construction of new projects. For a specific example, let's look at Bangladesh. In 2020, all the major commercial banks in the country publicly refused to finance the proposed 1,320-megawatt Bashkali coal power plant. As a result, this $3 billion project is now likely suspended or eventually canceled due to a lack of funding options. Dozens of similar cases have played out around the world. Beyond stopping proposed projects outright, reduced financing availability also shortens the lifespan of existing coal assets. Plants struggle to raise capital for maintenance and upgrades, squeezing coal company revenues. Next, let's talk about how banks distancing themselves from coal directly squeezes the revenues and profits of coal mining corporations. As financing options constrict, major coal firms like Peabody Energy now face far higher borrowing costs when trying to access loans and credit from the few banks still willing to lend. This dynamic eats into their bottom line. Additionally, coal companies are often forced to offer very high returns and terms to attract other, more expensive forms of financing from hedge funds and private credit markets. So banks choking off cheap debt financing avenues has objectively reduced the profitability and viability of running a coal business today. Accelerated energy transition. Stepping back and restricting coal financing also accelerates the broader global energy transition and increases the growth of renewable energy sources. As coal projects face higher costs, solar, wind, geothermal, and other renewables get relatively cheaper in comparison. This prods utilities and corporations to increase clean energy capacity. For example, a case study shows that since major Indian banks adopted coal divestment policies, the share of renewable energy as a percentage of the country's total electricity generation has risen from 13% to 24%. So directives that choke off coal funding end up catalyzing wider shifts in energy infrastructure. Big picture climate impact. Finally, let's talk about big picture climate impact. Reducing coal financing provides meaningful emissions reductions. Fewer projects were developed to avoid millions of tons of future CO2 emissions. It forces global coal phase-out to happen faster. But energy economics experts argue divestment alone isn't enough to meet Paris Agreement goals. Other policy actions are still essential. So banks moving away from coal puts real pressure on the industry. But work remains to decarbonize the wider economy. Alright, that wraps up our detailed dive into what really changes when major banks decide to stop financing coal. From project delays to squeezing profits to reshaping energy infrastructure, we've seen the impact is more significant than many first predicted. Let me know your thoughts on banks ditching coal in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more videos analyzing key issues linked to business, economics, and the climate. See you in the next one.